Okay, Mayor and Commissioners, before you, we'll have a request for a public hearing, which will be after my presentation, and then I would ask that you take a position on the revisions that we are proposing for our special assessment policy for this year. So generally speaking, on an annual basis, we go through our policy and see if there's anything that we've learned from just oddities as we've found how the policy reacts to different property circumstances and see if there's ways that we can improve the policy. So really what we're looking here today is those improvements that we'd like to see integrated into this policy. The outline of the things we'll be visiting about will be our adjustment section, how we handle the subdivision of parcels, the assessment terms, and then an effective date of when these changes would become effective. So the adjustment section, it's a section that we have in our policy previously. So it's an existing section, but we are consolidating information from various other sections into one just adjustments section only. So the first item is the private drive. That is an area where we have a named a named private street. And if there is a named private street, we give that property, whether it's a commercial or residential property, a discount to help rectify that additional contribution that they are providing by having a private street. That's one less street that we have to worry about, but recognizing that they're still a participant in the public street network. So that's a condition that we provide, and we want to have that's in the policy currently, but we just move that around. So you'll see a strikeout and underline component of that, but there's really no changes that we're proposing to the private drive section. The same can be said with our multi-street section. That's a segment of this policy where we recognize that there might be an improvement district on a corner lot that's only touching one of the two streets. So it's a function and an ability for us to bring that property into both improvement districts, but give them a discounted rate in both of those improvement districts, recognizing that they participate in potentially two street improvements for their two separate streets that may not be improved at the same time in the same project. The non-buildable area segment of the adjustments is a new component in our policy, but it is an existing component that we do in practice. So it is an area that we would reduce out or subtract out areas that we'd consider non-buildable. Many of that is like a stormwater easement or a no-build easement. So you may have a 1 acre lot, but if really there's only a small footprint for your home and the rest of it's under a slope easement, we want to reduce out that area so that it is more similar to other similarly sized homes and or parcels of a buildable area. So it's something that we've had in practice, but we used as more of a practical adjustment, but we do want to have that formally written into the policy. The last item I have on here is the undersized, oversized parcel. That's also something that we've been doing in practice really as long as I've been here, but try to formally write that into the policy. So if we compare the median lot size or the median parcel size in a residential or commercial, or in particular a residential area, and if a lot is twice as big as that median lot size, then they receive a little bit more of an assessment than those that are all within a particular range. So that's also existing in practice and written into the policy. We did add an additional undersized tier for the really small lots, and really when we find that happening, it's in a condominium type scenario that you might have an apartment building that might have a condominium documents registered, and all of a sudden that 4-story building, 3-story building has 60 individual owners. So this is a way for us to rectify that when we work into areas that have that sort of circumstance. We also are recommending a max residential 20 times the median parcel size, and where that comes into play is primarily in park district properties where it's a park-owned facility. It might be just green space. If it's not a revenue-producing facility like Capitol Ice or something like All-Season Sports Arena, we would find just a park. We treat those as residential, but they are usually the largest parcels that we have in our assessment districts. So by having a maximum on that, we would, I guess at some point, find a better balance of where we believe that benefit really ends for those types of properties. So the next section is a new section in the policy. It's the subdivision of parcels. This, once again, is something that we're doing in practice. So when a property comes in and it's replatted, we could be taking one 1 acre house and splitting, or one acre parcel and splitting it into 2 half-acre parcels. We currently just divide that through or prorate the square footage to assign the proportional share of the special assessment balance to each of those. We just don't have that written down anywhere. So we'd like to write that down here so that it's just very obvious and explicit how we handle those types of situations. We also want to recognize something newer relative to when the special assessment policy was first initiated is the concept of the utility capital charges. And we do have some properties that had a water or sewer trunk line assessment on them. And as they come into and replat their property, we would want to be able to have the ability to recognize the dollars that that property has spent and contributed towards their assessment in relation to whatever that utility capital charge might end up being. So that would also be explicitly written. That really just allows us to have that discussion with that landowner as they subdivide their lot that might have a special assessment balance for those existing trunk lines. The next section would be new in this policy as well as the terms. We have our terms that we use, and we communicate those in the letters that we send out to the landowners, but we really don't have them written down in one concise space that's public facing. So this is the terms that we would propose using. These are all in line with what we have done in the past. My exception would be that 1 year assessment for anything less than $500. We've never really had that balance established of what that minimum assessment should be. We've tied that to the cost of what one panel might be for a sidewalk replacement, or potentially that's been the metric we've tried to use for this number, so we don't stretch that $300 charge over 10 years potentially in bond for that additional length. So these would be the terms that we would recommend as our standard, and if we ever modified that, if we looked at what the costs come in or a particular project scope that got us a little out of whack of what we think is appropriate for that assessment term, we could approach the board at the time that we create that district to have that conversation that we would recommend a longer term or potentially a shorter term if we identified that in this process. I did want to note also that the secondary work items would follow the terms of that primary project. So in a pavement rehabilitation project, we might be replacing a concrete driveway as part of that. We will end up just having one assessment term for that entire property, which includes their street component as well as any of their elective driveway or sidewalk replacements that they might do as part of the project. We don't want to confuse it and have multiple bonding terms in an assessment. We just want to say this is your $3,000 bill. Some of that's for your street, some of that's for your elective driveway replacement, but in all, it's all assessed at whatever that main project is. So if it's a street rehabilitation project, it'd be that 7-year component, similar to a chip seal. We might be only doing a chip seal in an area, and that might just be a 1 year or potentially a 3-year assessment, but the chip seal that's part of the street improvement project would be tied into the street improvement project terms. So the effective date that we would recommend would be, let's see, what do we have here? It would be effective for all policy or for all projects not yet bonded. So that would include obviously the districts that are not yet created. So that's our future projects that we'd create at meetings like this and meetings that we'd move forward in the future. But there's also the projects that we've created. We've already actually created a couple of projects for our 2023 construction season, but we've yet not to have any work performed, and for that matter, yet to write the letters to landowners letting them know what their potential range could be. So those two were at a minimum what we thought we'd want to do. We did analyze all the projects that are, the districts have been created. The improvements might have even been constructed in 2022, but we haven't bonded that improvement yet. So most of our street improvement projects are constructed in, let's say, 2022, but we'll come back through in 2023 and perform a final chip seal on that roadway and then bond at the end of the 2023. So those 2022 projects are still on the books. We've sent letters to people. We analyzed all of those letters to make sure that we are still within the range. Whatever changes we're making here are still within the range that we let our landowners know prior to the petition or the protest period ending. And in all of those situations, the properties have a dollar amount still within the range that we had identified or less than the range that we had previously identified. So with that knowledge, we feel pretty comfortable saying that this should be effective for really all of the projects that we haven't bonded yet. So starting in our 2023 bonding season, we would then use this new policy, even though this might not have been the policy we used when we first created that district, but because the changes that we're making really aren't any changes. We're just writing down the things that we were already doing. It really didn't affect any of those attribute tables and the assessments that the landowners would receive. It was still within that range. So with that, our recommendation would be to approve the special assessment policy as presented, effective really immediately. And then I take any questions you have. And as a reminder, this is a public hearing. So I guess after I'm done, open up the public hearing and go from there.
Mayor and Commissioners, Gabe, so a lot of the adjustments, I guess, why are we changing them? Is it just some information that we receive from citizens and some different things to take a look at, or, some of the conversations that we've had at this table to kind of clean up some of the language? I guess, what was the thought process as far as some of the adjustments that we see?
Sure. Mayor and Commissioners, Commissioner Marquardt, in about 2015, we had a lot of what we would consider the same language in our policies, trying to lay out as many rules as we possibly could. And then for whatever reason in 2015, we removed that section of the policy that had a lot of these same things that we just talked about, and then just kind of replaced it with a section that said we can make adjustments. The policy would allow for adjustments if there's an inequitable levying of assessment to any given property. So we kind of swapped out a really specific language for a really broad statement. And that broad statement has led us to interpretation, and then there's really no way for us to write that Excel equation besides going back to the previous versions of that same attribute table to see how we did it last time. But so the genesis behind this is really codifying the things that we're already doing, because I think that does help when we give this policy to a landowner who has a question about something, that we can just give it to them and then have them read it and understand it, as opposed to give it to them and say, oh, and by the way, there's about 5 or 6 rules that aren't in this policy that we also apply, that we need to make you aware of. So it's in addition to making it transparent, more transparent, there's also been through the task force, for the Special Assessment Task Force work that they have done, some conversations that have come up to better understand how does the policy work, and in what ways could we improve it. And one of those was that issuance of a maximum size for the residential lot, as we were working through what a street utility fee could be, or really what a special assessment could be. We have some really large parcels in our community that we've really never hit with a project, so we don't get to see how that property performs under our current policy. But through that exercise of going through what a street utility fee could look like, we were able to kind of recognize that there's some oddities that would occur. It's just we've never actually improved a street in the vicinity of that particular parkland to realize how inequitable the policy would have been. So we kind of got a little sneak peek of what the policy would do, and we're now just trying to be proactive in addressing some of those shortcomings.
Okay, one other question, if I may. If you can you, for the listeners and the viewers that are watching, when you talk about private drives, can you give some examples of what private drives are?
Sure. A private drive, as described here, is a named street that provides access that isn't owned and operated by the city. So there might be a road, it might look like a road, but it's not a road that we plow, it's not a road that we maintain. Some examples of that, we have various private roads in some multifamily type developments where it might be a twin home and there might be a loop road or a cul-de-sac off of the main road. And so those examples off of, let's say, there's some off of Colt Avenue in North Bismarck, and there's even some off of in Buckskin. There would be some. Just trying to think of examples without saying that that's the only one, but there's examples of single or twin home family homes that are on private streets. The example that we see a lot of is a manufactured home park. So there's a various number of manufactured home parks that, while they may be commercial in nature, similar to an apartment building as Century Code would describe it, there are residents living there, and there are private infrastructure that home, that manufactured home park takes care of. So if it's a named street, then we recognize that in our policy and provide a discount.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I think for now, we'll go to the public hearing.
Yep.
So this is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on the topic of special assessment policy, please come forward, state your name, and sign in. A second call for public comment. Third call. Hearing and seeing none, the hearing is now closed. Commissioners?
Mayor?
Yes. Is this Commissioner Zinker?
It is, yes. Thank you, sir. Mayor, Commissioners, so I thank Gabe for bringing this forward, and it's obviously work that comes from the Special Assessment Task Force. The only thing I think we need to address in here, and Mayor, you were in those Special Task Force meetings, is I think this is an opportunity for us to make an adjustment to the manufactured home courts. I know at one time, Commissioners, before Mayor Schmitz, you were on the board, Commissioner Marquardt and I had conversations with the manufactured courts about bringing that rate closer to single-family homes. Even though they're large parcels with multiple single-family dwellings on them, they are charged very close or almost a commercial rate. So that would be my only sticking point of this new policy.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Can I ask so I know we have an email that was attached regarding this, I believe, to this topic. Gabe, would you be able to come up and I can ask a question? Maybe this will get to it. So we had an emailed in comment from a citizen around the manufactured home parks and maybe it's adding a factor to the formula. It was from Dustin Grollo. Does that address this some?
Mayor and Commissioners, Mayor Schmitz, as we propose this, we do not propose any changes to how the city addresses private drives or parcels with accesses via private drives. So how that equates currently is that a commercial property, if all things being equal, would pay twice as much as a residential property. That's just how that's the baseline factor. But then commercial properties that have a private drive get a 75% factor on that. So they end up paying what would be a 2.0 factor times a 0.75 factor, which equates to a 1.5. So you might hear that there are manufactured home parks might pay 1.5 times what residential would do, and it comes from the combination of those two factors, of the one being the 2 factor for it being commercial, and the second one being that 0.75 for being a parcel with a named private street. So as we propose it here, we do not make any changes to that. If there were to be changes, we would want to maybe analyze the effective date, because what we've done so far for the effectiveness or the effective date of anything that we're talking about tonight, knowing that we didn't really modify the equations too much, I can feel comfortable saying it really doesn't affect anything that we've already sent letters out. If we make changes to something significant like that, it would obviously have an increased or an improvement or a decrease to the cost of the manufactured home park, but then in turn, everyone else has an increased cost that's not a manufactured home park. So we would want to ensure that the letters that we sent to landowners for that single family home are still within that range if there was any other changes to be that actually affected the rates as part of this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Commissioners? Commissioner Marquardt?
Mayor, Commissioners, Commissioner Zenker, did that answer your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I knew that it didn't change, so that's why I bring it up. I mean, we weren't in those meetings with the task force, and if we want to get to a utility type fee structure future for our citizens, I mean, what are we basing those manufactured courts on? Are we basing it on a commercial standpoint? Are we or what's that rate? Right? Even early or late last year when we had the discussions, we struggled ourselves as to where do we put those manufactured homes in. So if I remember right, those manufactured homes were like $6, $7, or $8 a piece, and if that's what the group came to a consensus on, then why would we not make that adjustment today if we had the opportunity?
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, if Gabe's answer was actually answering or not. I think it was, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about 2014. Did we change that percentage for the mobile home parks at one point in time? Like a quarter or something like that?
Mayor and Commissioners, Commissioner Marquardt, I don't recall the exact year, but it was in a reaction to the requests of those property owners. I know we also had, and you have to remember currently, we look at those manufactured home parks. They're classified on the state system as commercial properties, so that's how we look at them. I know looking at them with our proposed street utility fee, we're looking at them through a different lens and looking at them as residential or being treated similar to residential, but two different processes, two different methodologies. But we did also, back when that policy was changed, there was also input from commercial property owners. I believe there was a development down on South 26th Street that really caused kind of the feedback, and given the amount of investment made in private drives and et cetera, there was that concession made to allow the offset for those properties. So,
Right.
Again, feedback from the community, from property owners, and we took that into account at that time when the special assessment policy was reconsidered.
Mayor and Commissioners, if I may. So, yeah, and that's kind of what I was remembering a little bit, and I know that, as Keith had mentioned, that some of it is in state statute as well, right, as far as how they're classified?
Mayor and Commissioners, Commissioner Marquardt, that's the benchmark we use is when we're looking at the various properties, and because the manufactured home parks are considered commercial properties from a state assessment perspective, that's how we currently view them in our policy.
So if we wanted that change, it'd have to come, if we were to mirror it, would have to come from the state.
It could come from the state if they would make that classification change, but as I mentioned earlier, in our different approach to trying to pay for our street maintenance special assessments with the street utility fee, we would be able to, because it's our own local fee, we
Okay.
would take a different look at that if that were to come to fruition.
Thank you.
Gabe, did you have a further comment? You were indicating earlier.
Yeah,
you might-
maybe the only other thing I would add, Mayor Schmitz and Commissioners, is there was other items as we went through the Special Assessment Task Force that could have been integrated, and so we had a conversation about which pieces of the information that we've learned, more about our policy should we bring in here. And really, unless we're going to do a wholesale rewrite that would bring in apartment buildings and bring in caps on government properties and bring in a bunch of other types of elements into this policy, we really wanted to focus our efforts on that street utility fee as fixing that and making a system that worked for that, instead of putting those energies towards a revised policy, but really not being able to utilize that policy, because hopefully we would have that new fee in place by the time that we before this policy actually gets used, kind of concept.
Commissioner Marquardt.
Mayor and Commissioners, and this is basically on a yearly basis, so we'll see what it looks like this year, and then we can always change it as well. If something comes either from the state or if we do something different, we can change it, and just like we are tonight.
Mayor and Commissioners, Commissioner Marquardt, that's usually, I shouldn't say usually, that's one of the items that when something is brought to our attention from a landowner saying, hey, I feel like this was an inequity that was given to me on a project based on these circumstances, we can look at that and see if there's ways to improve the policy. And really, that's an ongoing thing that we do anytime we receive that input, in addition to the times that we're proactively trying to find those inconsistencies so that someone doesn't have to go through that exercise, and because we can just identify it early enough that we can fix it before it actually impacts someone to their detriment.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So, Mayor,
Yes.
Mayor, Commissioners. So then, if that's the case, and I guess I didn't realize, or maybe I forgot that it was tied to the state statute. So, but with that, then when do you think we will bring the verbiage and the work back to take the utility street fee to the vote of the people? Is that everybody's intentions, that we're still in 2024 in that June election?
I would think that's the case. I mean, we got to get through the legislature with a bill that has
And then we'll-
already been out. It's already out to address
Okay.
some of the issues around that street
Yep.
utility fee.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. So what would be the wishes of the commission?
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call roll.
Commissioner Splonskowski,
Yes.
Commissioner Marquardt,
Yes.
Commissioner Zanker,
Yes.
Commissioner Cleary,
Yes.
Mayor Schmitz.
Yes.